please.
Daddy!
Don't do this now!
This mark will remind you of the man who took everything you had. After that night, say he was a changed man. His spirit crossed over, giving him power that can't be explained.
Jonah Hex.
Goldsman, thinking you might need aid.
Cut him down!
Jonah Hex.
You don't look so tough.
Hex, what happened to your face?
Cut myself shaving. What happened to yours?
Always do like when you finally show up.
Jeez, woman, how many men you see in a day?
Quentin.
Don't you dare say that name to me.
Quentin Turnbull surfaced about a month ago.
One Turnbull dead. Why didn't you just say that to begin with? Anything new, Smith?
Thought you'd never ask. I take it that means you approve.
This is the future. Future's bright. You shoot.
War begins right here!
Ain't much for being owned.
You near settled our score.
What's it like to go through life with a face like that? Show you. Still got that knife in your garter?
They took it.
Still got that derringer in your bustle?
They took it all, Jonah.
Well, searched you for darn good, didn't they?
Wouldn't you?
Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is based on a powerful Hollywood movie story, explained in a simple and interesting way. This is not just a movie recap, it's a journey through emotions, struggle, and unforgettable moments. So relax, stay till the end, and enjoy this amazing story. Jonah Hex, 2010, Movie Review. Jonah Hex is a 2010 American Western superhero film based on the DC Comics character of the same name. Directed by Jimmy Hayward, in his live-action debut, from a screenplay by Neveldine/Taylor, the film stars Josh Brolin in the title role, alongside John Malkovich, Megan Fox, Michael Fassbender, Will Arnett, and Michael Shannon. Produced by Legendary Pictures, Andrew Lazar's Mad Chance Productions and Akiva Goldsman's Weed Road Pictures, the film was released on June 18, 2010, by Warner Brothers Pictures. It was a commercial failure, having grossed only $11 million against a budget of $47 million. It received generally negative reviews from critics. Jonah Hex is a Confederate soldier who refuses an order from his commanding officer Quentin Turnbull to burn down a hospital. Hex is forced to kill his best friend Jeb, Turnbull's son, who draws a pistol on Hex. Turnbull later tracks Hex down at home and takes revenge for Jeb's death by killing Hex's family and branding Hex's face. Hex is found near death and healed by the Crow people. The experience leaves him with the ability to speak to the dead. Turnbull fakes his death in a hotel fire and Hex, unable to seek revenge, becomes a bounty hunter. In 1876, a gang of men led by Turnbull hijack a train carrying components of an experimental weapon invented by Eli Whitney. President Ulysses S. Grant realizes that Turnbull is planning to rebuild the weapon and use it to attack the U.S. on the 4th of July. Grant instructs Army Lieutenant Grass to find Hex and hire him to track down and stop Turnbull. Grass men find Hex in a brothel with a prostitute named Lila and inform him that Turnbull is still alive. Hex travels to meet Grass at his encampment and uses his ability to interrogate a dead soldier. The soldier tells Hex to find former Confederate Colonel Slocum, who now runs an illegal fighting pavilion in South Carolina. Hex confronts Slocum, who refuses to reveal Turnbull's location and sarcastically suggests he ask his dead friend Jeb. Hex throws Slocum to his death and burns the pavilion down. He decides to travel to Gettysburg and dig up Jeb's body to ask him for help. Jeb and Hex briefly fight before Jeb accepts Hex's apology for killing him. He grudgingly reveals that his father is at Fort Resurrection. Jeb also warns Hex to avoid death because many in the afterlife have plans for him. Hex confronts Turnbull at the fort and kills several men before he is shot point blank in the chest. Hex escapes by horse and travels back to find the Crow people. Turnbull orders a man named Burke, who helped kill Hex's family, to track down something Hex loves and bring it to him. While Hex is being healed again, Burke finds and kidnaps Lila. Turnbull assembles the weapon and conducts a test on a small town in Georgia, completely destroying it. Hex sends a message to LT Grass with Turnbull's location and requests backup. Hex travels to Independence Harbor and infiltrates Turnbull's ironclad warship. He kills Burke, using his abilities to bring him back from the dead and incinerate him. Turnbull holds Lila at gunpoint and forces Hex to surrender. Hex and Lila escape their holding cell as LT Grass arrives and attempts to arrest Turnbull. Grass and his crew are destroyed by the weapon and Turnbull begins his attack on Washington, D.C. Hex attacks Turnbull. As they fight, Hex jams the weapon with a hatchet before locking Turnbull's neck in the machine. Hex and Lila escape the boat as the weapon backfires and explodes, killing Turnbull and all of his men. The next day, President Ulysses S. Grant gives Jonah Hex a large reward and a full pardon before offering him a job as sheriff of the entire United States. Hex declines, but assures the president that they can find him if they need him. He leaves the city with Lila. The film ends with Jonah Hex visiting Jeb's grave to apologize for his father's death before riding off. In 2000, 20th Century Fox developed a 1-hour television adaptation based on the character, with producers Akiva Goldsman and Robert Zappia involved, but the project never came to fruition. 14 In July 2007, Warner Brothers Pictures held the film rights to the character and sought to make a film. Goldsman paired with Andrew Lazar as producers, and Mark Naveldine and Brian Taylor wrote the screenplay, which adapted an incarnation of the comic books that combine the Western genre with supernatural elements. 16 In October 2008, Josh Brolin entered talks to be cast as Jonah Hex under the direction of Naveldine and Taylor. The following month, Naveldine and Taylor stepped down from being directors due to creative differences with the studio. 18 The studio explored the possibility of hiring Andy Fickman or Mick G, and by January 2009, it chose Jimmy Hayward, who previously directed Horton Hears a Who, to direct Jonah Hex. 16 By the following February, Brolin was set to star alongside John Malkovich, who was cast as the antagonist Quentin Turnbull. 5 Filming began in Louisiana in April 2009. Director Francis Lawrence was brought in to supervise a number of reshoots. Brolin would later admit that he hated the experience making the film, stating that at one point they had to reshoot 66 pages in 12 days, implying that the filming schedule was hectic. He would go on to blame the film's failure on studio interference in the film's post-production. While he also called Hayward inexperienced and a bad choice of director, he doesn't necessarily blame it all at him, because that was my choice, that was my bad choice. Initially, Megan Fox was also very critical of the movie, stating she doesn't even want her kids to see it. It would be nice to make some things that they can see, yeah, because something like Jennifer's body I'm not going to let them see for a long time. Something like Jonah Hex I'm not going to let them see ever. No one should ever see that movie. She slowed down her feeling about it years after, as she believes it was a decent movie. While I shouldn't have been nominated for an Oscar for it, I'm definitely not bad in it. Jonah Hex failed at the box office, opening at number 7 during its debut weekend with only $5,379,365 in 2,825 theaters, averaging $1,904 per theater. On its second weekend, the film only managed to gross $1,627,442, falling to number 10. The film ended its theatrical run on August 12, 2010, having grossed only $10,547,117 in total on a $47 million budget. Due to its negative domestic take, the film was not widely released internationally, grossing less than $500,000 outside the United States. On Rotten Tomatoes, Jonah Hex has an approval rating of 11% based on 152 reviews and an average rating of 3.6/10. The site's critical consensus reads, "Josh Brolin gives it his best shot, but he can't keep the short, unfocused Jonah Hex from collapsing on the screen." On Metacritic, the film has a score of 33 out of 100 based on 32 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C+ on an A+ to F scale. Keith Phipps of the AV Club gave the film a rare F rating, criticizing its short runtime and stating the 81 minutes, including credits, of Jonah Hex footage that made it to the screen look like something assembled under a tight deadline, and possibly under the influence. Roger Ebert gave the film a negative review, saying that the film is based on some DC Comics characters, which may explain the way the plot jumps around. We hear a lot about graphic novels, but this is more of a graphic anthology of strange occult ideas. The film was named Worst Picture of the Year by the Houston Film Critics Society at their 2010 awards ceremony. 3940 It was given 2 nominations at the 31st Golden Raspberry Awards, Worst Actress, Megan Fox, and Worst Screen Couple, Josh Brolin's face and Megan Fox's accent. So says Jonah Hex, an embittered ex-Confederate soldier turned bounty-hunting mercenary. And from that point on in this Western, actioner, comic book mashup, virtually everything Hex does proves that point. Through flashbacks, we learn that Hex killed Confederate Gen. Quentin Turnbull's son Jeb during the Civil War, something Turnbull has no intention of forgiving. In fact, brutal revenge is the only thing on his mind. Soon, Turnbull ties Hex to a cross and sets fire to his cabin with his wife and son inside, making Hex watch his loved ones burn to death. Then Turnbull brands his initials, QT, into Hex's right cheek, sneeringly telling the man that every time he looks in a mirror for the rest of his life, he'll be forced to recall his tormentor. It's 1876, and Turnbull, who was allegedly killed before Hex could take care of that job himself, turns up as a terrorist determined to destroy the United States government during the nation's centennial celebration. When word gets out that Turnbull is plotting to decimate Washington, D.C., with a futuristic weapon of mass destruction, President Ulysses S. Grant recruits the only man he thinks can take Turnbull out, Jonah Hex. Hex agrees to help, but not because of patriotism or concern for the common man. All he wants in life is to see Turnbull suffer even more than he has. His sole friend, not counting his dog and his horse, is a derringer-toting, dagger-under-the-garter prostitute named Lila, who joins forces with him to find Turnbull. Based on a DC Comics character, Jonah Hex is said to have the fate of the country resting on his shoulders. We see Hex as a loving, attentive, and tender husband and father. And though he spares no one he believes deserves punishment, isolated gestures indicate that he has some semblance of an honor code. When he shoots an antagonist who falls out of a window, for instance, he offers the bartender a coin to pay for the damage. And he has nothing but contempt for a group of corrupt lawmen. They was wearing badges, he tells Lila, but not one of them was no lawman. Eventually we learn the details behind Hex's shooting of Jeb Turnbull. When Gen. Turnbull ordered Jeb and Jonah's unit to burn down an enemy hospital with people in it, Jonah refused. Jeb drew on Jonah in an attempt to get Jonah to obey the order, and Jonah shot him. They two were best friends, and Jonah apologizes at one point for killing his friend. It's also implied that Hex supports freedom for African American slaves, and we see one such character and his family's gratefulness for their freedom. Jonah has the ability to momentarily revive corpses with his touch. He then speaks to them, and they're able to give him information about the location of folks who are still alive. And he can bring these dead bodies back at any time, it seems. He exhumes Jeb's body after 6 years in the grave, for example, to try to get information about Turnbull's whereabouts. If the dead fail to cooperate, Hex has the torture-like ability to cause their decaying bodies to burn, and they feel the pain of it. As for the film's spiritual worldview, it's murky at best. The story never goes into detail about where the dead actually are, but it seems to be an underworld of sorts that's neither heaven nor hell, but closer to the latter. Hex tells one character that the sounds he hears are the hellhounds that are coming for him. When he's revived, Jeb warns Hex not to die, because the denizens of the underworld apparently have cruel plans for him. Early on, we hear that Hex was rehabilitated by a group of Crow Indians after he was branded by Turnbull. A mystical healing ceremony later in the movie shows, presumably, the same people reviving Hex again after he's been shot. The ceremony involves the Crow smoking pipes, blowing smoke at him and chanting, after which a half-dead Jonah inhales and exhales that smoke. His eyes glow green and a third ghostly eye appears in his mouth before a crow exits his throat, perhaps suggesting its spirit has entered him via the Crow tribe. It's implied that Lila regularly turns tricks, and she dismissively calls sex a transaction. Her primary wardrobe is a very low-cut negligee, garter belts, stockings, a corset, and a bustle sans dress. At one point, she suggests that men groped her while searching her for weapons, and she says that Jonah would have done the same in a similar situation. Lila and Jonah kiss in bed, and it's implied that they've had sex. She's draped in a sheet, her shoulders exposed, and he's shirtless as she kisses the scars on his chest. Lila longs for a real relationship with Jonah instead of just sporadic trysts whenever he happens to show up. But he resists, he says, because he doesn't want Lila to be hurt or killed by someone trying to get to him. A regular customer harasses Lila at one point, saying he'll have his way with her, and saying that he owns her. She kills him. About half of this 82-minute film is composed of violent scenes. Though we rarely see graphic kill shots, mayhem and destruction are the names of the game here. In an early scene, for example, Hex drags 3 bodies, and 1 head in a bloody bag, into a town to collect a bounty from the local sheriff. He soon discovers he's wandered into a well-planned ambush, and he proceeds to kill his 8 armed assailants, and then set most of the town on fire for no apparent reason. And that's just the beginning. Men's heads get kicked, hit with weapons and bashed against walls. Hex kills a man by thrusting him into a dry-docked boat's whirling propeller blade. We see the body in a pool of blood. Train cars carrying soldiers, women, and children detonate into balls of fire when Turnbull attacks. A town and all of its inhabitants are annihilated by Turnbull's high-tech munitions. 2 ships, filled with unseen sailors, explode in a harbor. A man gets electrocuted and falls from an electrical pole he's working on, a scene played for humor. Another man falls from a roof after being shot, and 1 more is choked with a chain. On and on it goes. Several people and 1 man's face end up on the receiving end of hatchets. Hex supernaturally shatters a burning corpse. Turnbull shoots a man point blank in the back of the skull and fires a bullet into another man's head even after he begged for mercy. Both acts take place out of the frame, we hear the gunshots. A gladiatorial fighting ring of sorts is surrounded by bloodthirsty men betting on a to-the-death bout between a giant man and a bald, almost demonic snake-like opponent whose saliva is acidic. Hex eventually burns down the entire edifice and everyone trapped within it. We see Hex's wife choked and held hostage by Turnbull's men. One of Lila's clients slaps her face and pulls her by the hair. Hex gets shot several times and is shown bloodied and dying. 2 corpses are seen, 1 greatly decomposed and freshly dug up from a grave. Lila and Jonah viciously kill numerous guards as they escape from Turnbull's clutches. Several men catch on fire, and at one point Jonah's hand does too. Another villain meets his demise when he's trapped in machinery that mangles his body, off-screen. If all that isn't enough, we're also forced to watch as Hex heats up an axe blade, then lifts it to his scarred face in an attempt to delete the initials QT. We don't see contact, but what's implied is still quite unsettling. Crude or profane language. God's name is misused once, and Jesus is abused 3 times. We hear one S word and at least 10 uses of H. Betard is used a half dozen times, a whole 3 or 4 times. Other language includes bloody and a crude reference to the male anatomy. Several times we see characters knocking down mixed drinks. In one such scene, more of Hex's drink dribbles out of the hole in his cheek than actually goes down his throat. Turnbull throws a drink into a man's face. Turnbull exhibits utter contempt for the government. And he believes that the government can be destabilized by terrorizing its citizenry. Instill enough fear into people, he says, and they'll tear down the government that's supposed to protect them. In his quest to build a superweapon, Turnbull steals government cannons, machinery, and ammunition at the expense of people's lives. He also refuses to save innocents when he's in authority during the war. As for Hex's loyalties, we learn that the only reason he sided with the Confederates was because he didn't want anyone to be in charge of him, an anarchic philosophy that's patently ridiculous upon closer inspection. When Grant eventually offers Hex a job as something like America's sheriff, Hex spouts a similar anti-establishment line. The bloodthirsty drive for retribution is the sole plotline in this threadbare story. It fuels every move Hex and Turnbull make. And as wave after wave after wave of violence washed over me in the theater, I wondered what audiences are attracted to in the grim theme of vengeance. Is it our own mortality and fallibility that make us pay to see larger-than-life characters like Jonah Hex? Do we wish we had his preternatural abilities and renegade spirit so we could escape our desk jobs or punish the bully who once tormented us? Do we ourselves seek revenge? And are we so unforgiving that we enjoy vicariously watching bad guys get theirs? The filmmakers apparently consider Jonah Hex's uncanny ability to stay alive and his penchant for brutally exacting revenge exciting and commendable. This antihero's deadly spite, cynicism, and hatred, however, are definitely not qualities worth aspiring to. The movie's production notes state, Jonah Hex is an epic action-adventure about one man's personal quest for redemption against the canvas of the battle between good and evil. The problem with this statement is the fact that Hex isn't looking for anything even close to redemption. He merely wants his enemies to suffer. He is so driven by his vendetta against Turnbull, in fact, that he says even in death, vengeance is the one thing you can't let go of. And believe me, he should know. So it's actually Jeb who hits the mark when he says that his father and Jonah are 2 men bent on murdering folks to make the pain go away. Jonah Hex is a supernatural western about a bounty hunter in the Wild West with supernatural protection, who is hired by the American government to stop a terrorist plot led by his old nemesis. Josh Brolin stars as the title character, Jonah Hex, whose family was killed after he shot it out with his Confederate superior's son when Jonah refused to help them burn down a hospital. John Malkovich plays the Confederate colonel, Quentin Turnbull. After killing Jonah's wife and son, Turnbull leaves Jonah for dead, deliberately branding his face. Some Crow Indians rescue Jonah, however, saving him from certain death. Their mystical healing makes Jonah harder to kill. He also has the power to wake the dead and get information from them. After hunting for Turnbull, Jonah comes to believe that he died in a fire. Jonah then becomes a bounty hunter. He brings 3 dead criminals into a small western town, but the officials refuse to pay him and try to kill him. Jonah succeeds in killing them instead, and he pins the late sheriff's badge on the blacksmith as he leaves town. Meanwhile, it turns out that Turnbull is very much alive. Not only that, but he is stealing parts for a powerful new weapon to attack the US government out of spite. President Grant orders his men to get help from Jonah Hex, whose reputation precedes him. Jonah agrees. But he also wants to get revenge against the evil Turnbull for killing his wife and son. Jonah Hex is a strange mixture of spaghetti western, terrorist action thriller and supernatural horror. As such, it doesn't try to stray too far from its B-movie roots, which is a good thing. The movie is fun and entertaining without being overbearing. As usual, John Malkovich makes a striking villain. Jonah Hex doesn't seem like it runs from a script as much it runs from an outline. The basic plot beats are in place, characters have motivation, events occur in a mostly logical order, although the actions within those events don't hold up so well, and then the movie ends in 80 minutes. I don't think there's a scene in Jonah Hex that lasts longer than 5 minutes. I'm all for brevity of storytelling, but Hex seems to be racing to the end before anyone notices it exists. That's a shame because it has some good performances and some creative sparks. But watching the movie, you know that it's been edited to hell and stripped of what it was supposed to be, for better or worse. It's a bloody, angry revenge flick that doesn't have any blood and is trying to manage its anger. The result is an uneven film that never feels true to itself and does the bare minimum in order to get by. Josh Brolin stars as Jonah Hex, a disfigured Confederate soldier turned bounty hunter out to avenge his family's death by killing his former commanding officer, Quentin Turnbull, John Malkovich. Aside from being really good at killing people, Hex also has the ability to communicate with the dead. Contracted by the US government, Hex is tasked with stopping Turnbull before the terrorista, as the Mexicans call him, uses a super weapon to destroy Washington, D.C. on the Centennial. Hex also has what would technically qualify as a romantic relationship with a prostitute, played by Megan Fox, but they're probably on screen together for less than 10 minutes. Unlike the fun talking with dead folks aspect, the relationship with Fox's character feels perfunctory. Hex has wilder elements worth exploring, but it's constantly dragged down by tired Hollywood conventions. Strangely enough, for a movie rushing to get to the finish line, Jonah Hex doesn't have much energy. The film never drags, but it rarely seems to be having as much fun as it should. Brolin acquits himself well and Michael Fassbender steals the entire movie playing Turnbull's chief henchman. When the film gets outlandish, it gets fun. It's fun that Hex has crossbow guns that fire dynamite. It's fun that Hex talks to the dead like it's no big deal. But most of the time, the film is trying to be a standard blockbuster. Hex, despite its modest budget, has the scale of a big action movie, but no one's going to mistake it for one. It's too brief, too colorless, and doesn't know what kind of movie it wants to be. The problem with Jonah Hex isn't necessarily that it's not long enough. Its problem is that it's not enough, period. There's not enough laughs, not enough thrills, not enough confidence, and not enough fun. Brolin, Fassbender, and some of the more clever designs stop the movie from being a total wash, but the completed picture is as mangled as its protagonist's face. I didn't set my hopes very high walking into the theater to watch Jonah Hex. I knew it was based on a DC comic book character and that was the extent of my knowledge on the subject. I was a clean slate, my mind a lump of unformed clay just waiting for director Jimmy Hayward, Horton Hears a Who, to wrap his hands around it like a scene from Ghost, molding it into something exciting and entertaining. Well, Hayward is no Swayze, because I'm sad to say that Jonah Hex is not going to be the surprise hit of the summer. The film's story and pacing clods along like a horse who's thrown a shoe, unbeknownst to the writer. The pacing issues are largely due to the scatterbrained writing style of Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor, or as they are known in the credits, Neveldine and Taylor. Jonah Hex very much follows the fast-paced and hectic styling that N&T have established in their previous works, Crank, High Voltage and Gamer. The story of Jonah Hex opens on the main character, played by Josh Brolin, doing a voiceover as a group of Confederate soldiers unleash mayhem upon a bunch of unsuspecting Union soldiers. Hex talks about how he was bred for war, how war is in his blood and war is what he is good at. Then there are some jumbled cut shots of a different outfit of Confederate soldiers being captured by the Union Army for reasons that won't be fully explained until 45 minutes into the film. The audience is just supposed to go with it, I suppose. The opening credits are actually very entertaining and are, in my opinion, the best part of the movie. Hayward has used a modified version of cell shading animation to tell the entire story of who Jonah Hex is in a short 5-minute animated clip. Jonah Hex, as he is called throughout the entire film because no one ever calls him just Jonah, ever, has made an enemy in his former commander Quentin Turnbull, played by the once great John Malkovich, whose performance here is only slightly better than Megan Fox's. Jonah Hex killed Turnbull's son and betrayed his unit, so, in an act of retaliation, Turnbull burns Hex's wife and son alive, forcing him to watch them die. Then, just to rub it in, he scars Hex with a branding iron. But that's not how Jonah Hex gets that beautiful face we've all seen in the trailers. That part comes later. So far, even though a couple of minor plot points are hazy, the story is fairly simple and easy to follow. It's man versus man, mano a mano, the anti-hero pitted against the villain that did him wrong. I get that, and if the writers would have left it to that, the movie probably would be much better. Instead, Turnbull leaves his freshly scarred conquest hanging on an X from which, of course, he survives with help from the Crow Indians. As Jonah Hex explains, he didn't become immortal, but was close enough to being dead that he can now speak with the dead. Jonah Hex turns to vigilantism after the supposed death of his archenemies and winds up on the wrong side of the law. However, there is one problem. Turns out Turnbull was just faking death and has plans to blow up the entire United States Union. Okay. He wants to do it using a weapon that was invented by, wait for it, Eli Whitney. That's right, the inventor of the cotton gin apparently was a military weapons genius and designed but never built a super mega kill everything Gatling cannon. President Ulysses S. Grant thinks the only person capable of catching and stopping Turnbull is Jonah Hex and soon sets him out on the task. The hunt for Turnbull and his rowdy band of rabble-rousers begins and quickly ends 5 minutes later after Jonah Hex talks to a fresh corpse. Along the way, Jonah Hex joins up with his favorite prostitute, Lila, Megan Fox, who gets mixed up in things when Turnbull's right-hand man, Burke, kidnaps her. The rest of the film is all loud, chaotic action that makes little to no sense and includes a wealthy southern gentleman trader, a black general store owner that builds high-tech weapons that only get used once, some sort of demon albino cage fighter named Snake, and what can only be described as a case of Dragon Balls. And you get to enjoy all of this action and nonsense to poorly written and executed power rock music. Because, you know, that's how it was back then. What worked in Jonah Hex? Josh Brolin's performance is actually pretty good and there are some scattered moments of humor that work. I like the bit about the horse's name, and a couple of the fight scenes are enjoyable. What didn't work in Jonah Hex? Megan Fox and John Malkovich's performances are just plain bad and neither one of them can hold a southern accent. All of these characters live in Georgia and all the actors playing them can do is say y'all a few times. It doesn't help that most of the corny one-liners we hear in the trailer are delivered like they are corny one-liners in the film. I can believe a lot when it comes to movies. I can believe that Eli Whitney was a weapons genius, that a giant cannon that will obliterate everything in its path could be built in the late 1800s and a crow flying out of a man's mouth during an Indian medicine ritual, but I draw the line in the believability sand when Megan Fox turns into an iron-slinging super whore. Fortunately for moviegoers, Toy Story 3 opens this weekend as well, and if Warner Brothers is very lucky, most people will forget that Jonah Hex was even in theaters. Jonah Hex is a western set around the town of Stunk Creek, although that doesn't entirely explain why the climactic scene involves an attack on the U.S. Capitol building in Washington. Using my powers of logic, I deduce that the characters traveled there from Stunk Creek. The movie is not precise in its geography. Most of the location filming was in Louisiana, which is not named, perhaps because that might make it hard to explain its vast deserts and dusty frontier town. The thriller involves a man named Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, who is bent on vengeance. During the Civil War, the evil Quentin Turnbull, John Malkovich, strapped him to a cross and made him watch as a house containing his family was set afire. Then Turnbull branded Jonah's face with a hot iron, causing difficulties with leaks when he tries to throw back a shot of whiskey. You can see why Jonah would want his revenge. To be sure, Turnbull mutters something about Jonah having previously murdered his family, meaning he isn't entirely without motive. Stunk Creek is your standard frontier town with a wide main street, a saloon, and a room over the saloon occupied by Lila, a sexy hooker. The presence of Lila in the film is easily explained. She is played by Megan Fox. If you want a woman in an old western town, there are only 3 occupations open to her: hooking, school marming, and anyone called Ma. Lila and Jonah are in love, for reasons unexplained. It certainly isn't because of the level of their conversation. The only hooker in a western I've ever believed in was in Lonesome Dove, but I've seen Lonesome Dove, and Jonah Hex is no Lonesome Dove. It's based on some DC Comics characters, which may explain the way the plot jumps around. We hear a lot about graphic novels, but this is more of a graphic anthology of strange occult ideas. Consider, for example, that Jonah was once so close to death that he wandered around on the other side and made valuable contacts there. He can even talk to the dead, and one corpse revives long enough to tell him precisely where Quentin Turnbull can be found. In what is possibly a confused stab at allegory, Jonah finds himself trying to prevent Turnbull from blowing up the Capitol building with a super weapon. In scenes set in the Oval Office, the US president is concerned by this threat by Turnbull, who is an embittered Confederate general, and decides that the wanted outlaw Hex is the only man who can prevent the plot from being carried out. A climactic battle scene takes place in the Potomac River between 2 ironclad ships. In US history, you will recall, there was such a battle between the USS Monitor and the Confederate ship Virginia. One of these ships looks like the Monitor, but I'm unclear. Anyway, Turnbull is on board, directing the weapon, which is a big cannon. He's previously tested it by blowing up a western town. Now he trains it on the Capitol, depicted in special effects that suggest the Capitol and the Washington Monument were the only 2 structures in Washington at that time, at least for purposes of firing on. After Hex saves the day, he's invited into the Oval Office, thanked, and then presented with a big badge. What is this badge? The president tells Hex, America needs a sheriff. This provided the audience with a big laugh, which sounded like it might have been bottled up for a while. Jonah Hex is not a handsome man. With scars covering his body, a grimace in his jaw, and the strong hint of weathering in his face, the man is anything but ravishing. The same can be said for the film. Jonah Hex was not enticing or refined. The film lacked the arc of a plot, the grace of similar comic adaptations, and the allure of coherency. Despite all of these flaws, much like Jonah Hex himself, I still found an attraction. Josh Brolin is a rough and tough Western renegade, Jonah Hex, who, after losing his family, ventures off as a bounty hunter. Megan Fox is a smoking hot, gun-wielding prostitute looking to make Jonah Hex her man. John Malkovich resurrects his evil mastermind performance from Con Air as Quentin Turnbull, the man responsible for the death of Hex's family and, soon, the destruction of the United States. How, do you ask, could this film fail? Regardless of such a stacked deck, it does indeed fail. The film lacks an arc. Instead of a beginning, a middle, and an end, the viewer gets strung along on Hex's mishmash journey, flat and horizontally. Previous films have pulled off the lack of an arc, but still found ways to build the suspense leading up to fights and climaxes. Jonah Hex does not. The fights with prominent characters, like Michael Fassbender and John Malkovich, are thrown at you without warning, and not in a good way. The main characters are completely expendable, Will Arnett and Wes Bentley for example. Without anticipation, Jonah Hex just happens, with the viewer experiencing no emotion or investment. Jonah Hex is the DC Comics version of Marvel's Ghost Rider. However, Ghost Rider was salvageable. Nicolas Cage, Eva Mendes, Donald Logue, and Wes Bentley work well enough together that the film is worthwhile. Jonah Hex scatters its characters across the game board and expects all the elements to still fall together in an interesting pattern. This was not the result. Apparently, according to the lore of Jonah Hex, starting fires and causing explosions was what the Wild West was made of. I cannot recall a town that was left standing, besides the capital, by the end of the film. The film did, however, bring to my attention, A. how flammable buildings supposedly are and, B. how buildings can explode when doused in a fire. The graphics of the film left much to be desired. The cannonball graphics were laughable and the golden orbs were extremely out of place. The makers of the film would have aided themselves by viewing Wild Wild West with Will Smith and Kevin Kline before making Jonah Hex. The idea of steampunk, fictional work set in an era or world where steam power is still widely used but with prominent elements of either science fiction or fantasy Wikipedia, was masterfully crafted in the production of that film. Jonah Hex tries to accommodate the idea of steampunk, but lets its anachronistic tendencies fall to the wayside. The death-harboring ship cannon is obviously out of place in the original Western world, yet no attention is brought to its disconnection. Jonah Hex relies completely on its graphic novel origins. The creators somehow believe that by adapting the film from comics, there is no need to follow normal movie-making conventions. Jonah Hex gets thrown into the annals of better films like Sherlock Holmes, Ghost Rider, and Wild Wild West. Though the cast is not at their best, they are ultimately what wins me over the most about the film. Left wanting more Megan Fox and John Malkovich as these characters mean the creators at least did something right. As long as you do not anticipate an award-winning film, Jonah Hex is still enjoyable and satisfies the warmongering, arsonist/pyromaniac in all of us. Leaving the theater, I felt as though I did not enjoy the film as much as I did, but looking back and awarding it 3 stars, it left at least some impression with me. At a mere 84 minutes, including credits, Jonah Hex is a mercifully brief encounter with just about everything that's wrong with contemporary cinema, ranging from hyper-stylized but pointless special effects, slipshod plot development, ludicrous dialogue, and production quality that can best be described as laughable given the wealth of technology available these days. Virtually everyone in this cast, with the exception of Fox, has proven more than able to act. So, why don't they? What goes so incredibly wrong here? The film is written by the same crew that gave us the Crank films and Gamer, films that made considerably more than they were worth at the box office. Thus, it's understandable why Warner Brothers entrusted them with this DC comic title, featuring an older character from the DC archive that doesn't come close to be fleshed out here. Brolin essentially mumbles and scowls his way through the film, never quite becoming a caricature but also never quite creating an interesting character. Malkovich fares even worse, with director Jimmy Hayward, Horton Hears a Who, clearly in over his head and completely unable to rein the stage actor with histrionic tendencies into an acceptable decibel. Malkovich grimaces and groans and squeals his way to what is easily one of the year's most laughably bad villains. Arnett and Shannon aren't nearly as shameful, though the word nondescript comes to mind. Megan Fox does what Megan Fox is supposed to do, she strikes a pose, looks beautiful and momentarily distracts you from the awfulness of the film. Aidan Quinn and Michael Fassbender are welcome additions, one only wishes they'd been given something decent to do. Seldom does a film feel so stitched together, as if the editors looked at the final product and realized they'd best try to piece something decent together before the folks at Warner Brothers got a look at the film. Jonah Hex feels out of joint, uneven, and is so completely incoherent that it's difficult to fathom that the finished product actually matches anyone's original artistic vision, assuming, of course, that anyone actually had an artistic vision. There are film reviews for which I will find myself spending a painstaking amount of time trying to find the perfect words to communicate an accurate critical analysis that will help you decide if the film is for you. Then, there are films like Jonah Hex where the entire goal is to simply finish the review and move on from this cinematically painful chapter in my life. I miss Dr. Miguelito Quixote Loveless, Michael Dunn, the diminutive villain with grand schemes on the 1960s television series The Wild Wild West. he was a villain to reckon with, one far above John Malkovich's burlap sack portrayal of renegade madman Quentin Turnbull in Jonah Hex. Loveless devoted his creatively criminal and misguided scientific genius to endless schemes embellished with his weapons of mass destruction, gleefully challenging government agent James West to stop him each time they crossed paths. Paths are crossed in Jonah Hex, but they don't seem to head in any sensible direction. They meander around with the artlessness of that silly Wild Wild West movie with Will Smith, then saunter a well-trod vengeance trail much like the outlaw Josie Wales, and finally stop plumb cold at the usual quest between mundane here and mystical there with less force than the crow. A weapon of mass destruction, created by Eli Whitney no less, figures prominently. They always do. Mysterious glowing balls of fire provide the triggering mechanism for larger balls of fiery, explosive material. Turnbull does a dry run of the weapon's capabilities by blowing up a small town just after church services. He threatens to blow up the nation's capital on the centennial celebration for July 4th. President Grant, Aidan Quinn, conscripts Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, into hunting down Turnbull and ending the madman's grand scheme. The bad blood between Hex and Turnbull goes back a ways. Turnbull killed Hex's family in retribution for Hex causing the death of his son. A flashback done in comic book format explains, sort of, how the Indians helped Hex survive to become the I Talk to the Dead bounty hunter badass wanted by the law. Watching the colorful but limited animation, it brought to mind those Marvel superheroes cartoons in the 1960s. I wondered, did they run out of budget? Was this movie originally planned as animation? Why suddenly eschew perfectly good live action for a graphic novel on screen? Why not pepper this lengthy backstory as flashbacks throughout this leisurely paced movie to make it less onerous? I thought about this until I don't play house Lila, Megan Fox, and Hex hook up for a bedtime social visit. Then I started thinking, why is she in this movie? Beauty to his ugliness. She doesn't have much to do, or much to say, or much to act on. Brolin has even less to work with, but he does have a nifty ability to talk to the dead. He just grabs hold of a moldy corpse and it springs to life. But he needs to talk fast because the fresher the corpse, the faster it starts to immolate into ashes. Aside from Hex's orneriness, this appears to be his best and only mystical ability. Red-tinted fever dream flashes of him fighting Turnbull around a coffin with a crow sitting on its lid are the only other mystical touches. They don't make sense, but touches they remain. Eventually Hex talks to enough dead people to find Turnbull. Before he meets his nemesis, he stocks up on the usual badass tricky gunnage that can deliver high explosive impact and flailing bodies flying asunder with minimal effort. He gets it from this movie's equivalent of James West's gadget buddy Artemis Gordon. Hex and Turnbull and Lila square off on an ironclad ship in Independence Harbor as it speeds toward the capital with its deadly weapon preparing to fire. Union soldiers pull up alongside in their version of the ironclad monitor and ask Turnbull to kindly surrender his weapon of mass destruction and stop being such a damn nuisance. While they wait for his reply, he locks and loads and blows them out of the water in a shower of little ironclad pieces. I was hoping for a better reenactment of the Battle of Hampton Roads. Whenever a movie is being made, someone should love that movie. It should be someone's passion project. Someone, the director, writer, actors, producer, etc. should put every fiber of their creative self into the project. And whether the movie proves a masterpiece or an abysmal failure, the effort of this someone should manifest on screen. The audience should be able to sense an enthusiasm about the project that, at the very least, suggests that the result was a work of someone's passion, even if it's a misguided dud. Watching Jonah Hex, it becomes painfully apparent that such a someone didn't exist in this production. Based on the long-running but little commercially known DC comic, this cartoonish western follows Confederate Army turncoat-cum-bounty hunter Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, on his quest for revenge. At the end of the Civil War, Hex turned his back on the South after his commanding officer, General Quentin Turnbull, John Malkovich, became cruel in his treatment of innocent civilians from the North. And so Turnbull retaliated by killing Hex's family and branding the man's face, leaving him for dead. When he's brought back from the beyond by a band of Native Americans, Hex can suddenly talk to dead people, but it's any wonder they can understand what he's saying through those gritted teeth of his. Hex's scarred face has a cheek hole and a thin string of tissue connecting his upper and lower lips. As his mouth is awkwardly restricted, he's forced to grunt his tough guy dialogue with an indecipherable burr. Hex, who's wanted by the authorities for his anti-hero lawlessness, pairs up with your typical hooker with a heart of gold, Lila, Megan Fox, to work for President Grant, Aidan Quinn, who dramatically, and laughably, asserts, "The future of our county may very well rest in Hex's hands." You see, Turnbull has built a super-secret weapon, not unlike the absurd giant mechanical spider from Wild Wild West, which the government designed but decided not to finish because it was too dangerous. But somehow Turnbull has assembled the parts from the scrapped plans of a super cannon, which shoots super cannonballs and detonates them on command with golden glowing orbs, the origins of which the movie didn't feel the need to mention. If this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry, it didn't make much sense in the movie either. This all leads to a climax that merges together 4 sequences at once. When Hex infiltrates Turnbull's floating ironclad fortress, the movie overestimates its audience's patience by editing together a fight between Hex and Turnbull, a fight between Lila and goons, a flashback to Hex's past, and a second, imaginary fight between Hex and Turnbull, apparently going on in Hex's mind. The cuts between these events are nonsensical and messy, but their muddled presentation doesn't compare to the audience's lack of concern by this point. The movie seems to have tried, and succeeded, in sending the audience into a collective indifference. But more than just being uninvolving, the movie's squandered possibility of a potentially enjoyable franchise and utter waste of an otherwise solid cast demands your irritation. Brolin, playing the near-invincible Hex, mumbles his lines through a shoddy-looking prosthetic mouthpiece that restricts his jaw and lip movement. Note to filmmakers, when your lead actor can't speak, it's time to rethink your practical makeup effects. As a result, Brolin, who can't seem to shut his mouth, can't quite pronounce his B's and P's, and he always seems on the verge of drooling. Opposite Brolin, Fox plays her usual lusty-voiced, pouty-lipped self, proving once again that she was hired for her overvalued looks and not for her acting talents. And despite playing a Confederate general, Malkovich doesn't bother attempting a Southern accent, as though he doesn't even want to try. Each performance is lazier than the last. But there's also an impressive supporting cast to consider. Oscar nominee Michael Shannon, Revolutionary Road, appears in a blur as an underground cage match announcer. His role was so brief, it had to be confirmed in the credits. Continuing his streak of bizarro, crazy-eyed performances, Wes Bentley, P2, plays Turnbull's secret benefactor with a baffling accent that could have been Southern or British, there's no way to be sure. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, The Losers, appears as a corpse. Comedian Will Arnett, TV's Arrested Development, has a small role as a straight arrow army lieutenant. But the most tragic of them is the appearance of Michael Fassbender, Hunger, Inglorious Bastard, as Turnbull's Irish lackey Burke. Fassbender, arguably the most talented and diverse actor in the cast, tries to make his jump into mainstream Hollywood movies here but instead wastes his talent on a goon role. Upon seeing these familiar faces throughout the movie, one can't help but wonder what any of them saw in the project. Writers Mark Naveldine and Brian Taylor, the anti-geniuses behind Gamer and Crank 1 and Crank, High Voltage, lend their usual brand of ultraviolent, character-less storytelling to the script as it appears on screen. The movie jumps around from set piece to set piece, none of them visually interesting or propelling the story in any important way. The one-dimensional characters speak cliché dialogue worthy of eye rolls, while illogical nonsense unfolds with only the slightest purpose behind it. It's probable that everyone attached signed on at the mere idea of a Jonah Hex movie because they were sold on the concept as a money-making comic book movie. Believing this is important, because the alternative, That these actors agreed to this disaster after reading a script, proves too frightening to accept. Director Jimmy Hayward's inexperience during the filming inspired the executives at Warner Brothers to hire director Francis Lawrence, I Am Legend, to complete extensive reshoots that were supposed to spruce up the humdrum action scenes, but didn't. If only Lawrence had enlivened the sleepy performances or congealed the story, Jonah Hex might at least be watchable. Whether the end product can be attributed to Hayward or Lawrence, the inert outcome plays like confused drivel without purpose. From the animated, second, prologue to the choppy editing that laughs in the face of all things linear, it's clear there was more material for this 80-minute movie, and that it probably didn't work, so it ended up on the cutting room floor. No one involved seemed to grasp the movie's tone, straight-up action, comic book action, or action comedy, so the audience will constantly ask themselves how they're supposed to react. Brolin goes one way, Malkovich goes another, and the director, can't keep control over the diverging shifts in both the performances and the script. Much of this can be attributed to Neveldine and Taylor, who in their movies frequently replace good storytelling with random ideas that are only half developed. Jonah Hex, like Batman and Robin and the 1998 version of the Avengers before it, finds Hollywood carelessly slapping together elements of a bankable property and failing in every respect, to degrees that go beyond just bad filmmaking and instead reach extremes of moviegoer abuse. One of the great disappointments of the 00s has been how DC Comics have failed to catch up with the massive success that Marvel Comics have been enjoying on the big screen. See the likes of Blade, 1998, X-Men, 2000, Spider-Man, 2002, Daredevil, 2003, Hulk, 2003, The Punisher, 2004, Elektra, 2005, Fantastic Four, 2005, Ghost Rider, 2007, Iron Man, 2008, Captain America, The First Avenger, 2011, Thor, 2011, The Avengers, 2012, Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014, Ant-Man, 2015, Deadpool, 2016, Doctor Strange, 2016, Black Panther, 2018, Venom, 2018, Captain Marvel, 2019, and sequels to most of these. DC have certainly seen high-profile adaptations such as Batman Begins, 2005, Superman Returns, 2006, The Dark Knight, 2008, and Man of Steel, 2013. During this era, we will try and forget about Catwoman, 2004. On the other hand, this is a pitiful handful compared to the runaway successes enjoyed by Marvel, most of which are now heading into second, third, even fourth, and fifth sequels. A number of DC-based projects were mooted throughout the 2000s, with promised adaptations of The Flash, Shazam, Wonder Woman, Justice League, but these have remained in perpetual limbo throughout the decade, with the only one of these to come near a green light being Green Lantern, 2011, which went into production just as the decade ended, and followed by an aborted live-action Wonder Woman TV pilot, and then in the mid-2010s the Zack Snyder-headed adaptations Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, 2016, Suicide Squad, 2016, Wonder Woman, 2017, Justice League, 2017, and Aquaman, 2018, all to very mixed, generally negative, reception. The only other DC adaptations to make it to the screen have been distaff ones that stand outside their regular canon: Constantine, 2005, Watchmen, 2009, and Jonah Hex here. Certainly, DC have enjoyed popularity on the small screen with the ongoing TV series Smallville, 2001-11, Arrow, 2012-20, The Flash, 2014-22, Supergirl, 2015-21, Krypton, 2018-9, Titans, 2018-23, and Batwoman, 2019-22, and the continuing success enjoyed by the various Batman, Superman, and Justice League animated films and TV series from Bruce W. Timm. However, this disappoints considerably in comparison to Marvel's runaway success story. Jonah Hex is one of DC's minor comic books. The character first appeared in All-Star Western number 10 in 1972 and gained enough of a popularity that he soon became the lead character in the comic book, which was renamed Weird West Tales a few months later, before gaining his own title Jonah Hex, which ran from 1977 to 1985. Jonah Hex was less a superhero comic book in the recognized sense than something that fell between the Western Gothic of a film like Clint Eastwood's High Plains Drifter, 1973, and a dark Avenger such as Batman and Marvel's The Punisher. Fantasy elements, despite their prominent premising in this film, were only sporadic. Jonah Hex's origin story is different to the one in the film where he receives the scarring on his face, the mark of the demon, due to his dishonorable killing of the son of the chief of the Indian tribe that adopted him. Subsequently, Jonah Hex was revived in Hex, 1985-7, a less popular series where he was transported to a post-Holocaust future and continued to act as a bounty hunter. Jonah Hex has been sporadically revived in various short graphic novel runs since and has made guest appearances alongside other DC superheroes, including everybody from Green Lantern, Swamp Thing, Justice League, and the Legion of Superheroes. Jonah Hex has appeared on the screen before in occasional animated episodes of Batman, 1992-5, Justice League/Justice League Unlimited, 2001-6, and Batman, The Brave and the Bold, 2008-11, and was later played by Jonathan Shaik in an episode of the TV series The Legends of Tomorrow, 2016. I must admit that prior to sitting down to watch Jonah Hex, the lineup of creative talents involved left me cold. The film is co-produced by Akiva Goldsman, who has laid a trail of devastation through genre material with his scripts for Batman Forever, 1995, Batman and Robin, 1997, Lost in Space, 1998, Practical Magic, 1998, I, Robot, 2004, The Da Vinci Code, 2006, I Am Legend, 2007, Angels and Demons, 2009, The Dark Tower, 2017, and Rings, 2017, and has also produced the less than inspiring likes of Deep Blue Sea, 1999, Mindhunters, 2004, Constantine, Hancock, 2008, and the terrible TV miniseries adaptation of Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, 2015. The script is from the writing/directing team of Neveldine and Taylor, who had previously made Crank, 2006, Crank 2, High Voltage, 2009, and Gamer, 2009, material that seems focused around a maddening empty-headed blur of frenetically shot action sequences and little else, as well as having signed on subsequently as directors of Marvel's Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, 2012, and Neveldine solo directing the exorcism film The Vatican Tapes, 2015, and Taylor the mass insanity film Mom and Dad, 2017. Director Jimmy Hayward is a total unknown, having previously worked as an animator at Pixar before co-directing Blue Sky Studios' Horton Hears a Who. 2008, Jonah Hex is his solo and live-action directorial debut. Amid this uncertain mix of creative names, actor Matt LeBlanc of Friends, 1994-2004, fame for some reason also turns up credited as an executive producer. I wanted to like Jonah Hex and gave it every chance, despite it being one of the year's biggest box office flops, but in the end it emerges as a strictly middling film, neither bad, yet nothing that you are willing to grant much beyond a basic mediocrity. It has clearly had a decent budget thrown at it, which is evident in matters like effects, makeup effects, and production design. There are some lavish scenery shots and worthy poses. It's just that Jonah Hex never seems to easily fit around any of these as a comic book adaptation. Maybe part of it is Jimmy Hayward's lack of prior experience as a live-action director. There are scenes where we seen a train blown up, where we visit a wrestling arena with a seeming mutant Snake Man, and numerous shootouts and explosions, but none of them seem inspired or have the audience cheering. Jonah Hex should have had the pyrotechnic lethality in its western poses of something like Desperado, 1995, or the grim ultraviolence of comic book adaptations like Sin City, 2005. The material is there but passes more as eye candy than with any kinetic or visceral charge. Jonah Hex also suffers the same problem that was endemic to one other DC adaptation of the 00s, Constantine, which was notedly also produced by Akiva Goldsman. And that is that it seems stuck at making comic book poses, the rather absurd image of Josh Brolin on a horse mounted with massive Gatling guns, or firing many crossbow guns that look like futuristic Uzis, and fails to get inside the dark mood of the comic book. To give Neveldine and Taylor credit, their script makes a fair attempt to delve into Jonah Hex's backstory and provide him with motivation. However, I am not sure if Jimmy Hayward is so attuned. The character of Jonah Hex should have burned with a desolate emptiness and the dark psychological fury of the modern action hero. The film achieves this in sporadic moments, some of the background writing, a scene with Josh Brolin shooting a man in a saloon, but mostly doesn't. Jonah Hex is also a film that would have gained immeasurably from being released with an R rating rather than aiming for a PG-13, something that would have allowed it to far more readily tap into the grim violence of the comic book than have to avoid showing any blood or look away when Josh Brolin is attempting to shove Michael Fassbender's head into a propeller. Part of the problem is also Josh Brolin. Brolin seems to have drawn his inspiration from the same source that the comic book originally did, Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, and gives an Eastwood-esque performance through clenched teeth and with dialogue kept to a grim minimum. On the other hand, Brolin also tempers the role with a laid-back cockiness as though he is not taking it terribly seriously and fails to fully project anything of either Clint Eastwood's flinty tautness or the singular grim intent of a modern action hero. The film tries to find something for last year's no-talent celebrity of the moment Megan Fox to do and provides her with a tough role that someone with half an ounce of acting ability would have eaten up. It is hard to tell if Megan Fox is making any effort, the character is so underdeveloped, and about the only thing you come away wondering is why she seems to have her facial features airbrushed in every shot she appears in. The great John Malkovich turns up in an underwritten role as the villain of the show but does little more than walk through the part. Word of mouth and a frigid box office reception gave me an obvious clue that 2010's Jonah Hex should be a terrible movie. Based on DC Comics' long-running Western series and featuring an excellent cast and an interesting premise, I was surprised that it flopped. I had no knowledge of the comic series or the character but decided put the bad reviews aside and watch it anyway. Josh Brolin plays Jonah Hex, a former Confederate soldier who has a giant scar on his face, the ability to speak to the dead, and, seemingly, cannot be killed. He's seeking revenge against one Colonel Quentin Turnbull, John Malkovich. Turnbull killed Hex's family in retaliation for Hex's disobedience of an order and the subsequent death of his own son. For eye candy, Megan Fox plays a prostitute named Lila. That's all I will tell you. The film runs a mere 81 minutes and summarizing the plot feels like a spoiler because there are literally zero surprises in this movie. It's pretty obvious that there was originally more to this film than what ended up in the final cut. The script is so predictable I could, and did, utter characters' lines out loud before they said them. The plot mechanics are simple and the amount of exposition via voice-over narration is laughable. Jonah Hex's ability to speak to the dead, which was added to the character exclusively for this film, is a lazy writing crutch that the script leans on a few too many times. Although, it does make for some nifty special effects. That said, I didn't hate Jonah Hex. I enjoyed its mashup of the Western and fantasy genres. While the plot is undeniably moronic, the whiplash pacing and Josh Brolin's tongue-in-cheek performance make it bearable. I could spend a long time pointing out all of the factual inaccuracies, but this is a comic book movie. And, as such, I can't really fault it for being a bit outlandish. None of it makes a lick of sense, but as the credits rolled, I found myself at least somewhat entertained. I expected a terrible movie and got a mediocre one instead. I'm okay with that. Almost every review says Jonah Hex is terrible, messy, stupid, and a complete waste of time. Well, my review is a little different. Jonah Hex is not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, however, the movie is not that horrible. Were my expectations low? Yes. Did I expect another Dark Knight from DC Comics? Hell no. This DC character is probably interesting in the comics, but the movie is short on time and material. Josh Brolin plays Jonah Hex and he tries. He really does. He tries to be a courageous Confederate soldier, who becomes an outlaw, and appears to be cool and witty at times. But the problem is you can never seem to take the movie seriously no matter how hard they try, and this goes for the characters as well. Hex watches his family get killed by Quentin Turnbull, John Malkovich, who he used to fight next to in the Civil War. But after Hex makes a choice and kills Turnbull's brother in the process, he seeks revenge, and after he burns Hex's house to the ground with his family inside, he scars half of Hex's face. And after escaping death, Jonah Hex becomes a bounty hunter who can talk to the dead. I know, right? Once the US military find out that Turnbull has faked his own death and now has weapons that can demolish a nation in his possession, they recruit Hex to find Turnbull and stop him once and for all. Now that's a deal he just cannot pass up. The movie is less than 80 minutes long, so it is very apparent that the material was thin. And what is sad is if director Jimmy Hayward wanted to make the movie last longer, he could not have done it. There is only the bare essentials in the movie with no surprises for the audience. Any longer and Jonah Hex would have been a lot worse. Now I have to say there are some cool parts in the movie. Michael Fassbender plays Turnbull's number one guy, Burke, and he adds some intensity and excitement to the movie. His character is a ticking time bomb just waiting to explode. And speaking of explosions, there are a lot in this movie. I think every time Hex leaves a place an explosion has to occur or a fire has to be started. There are some action sequences that work pretty well. The one between Hex and Burke is entertaining, but it does not last that long. And the battle between Turnbull and Hex is interesting because part of it is in the present and the other part is in a dream. Jonah Hex does have some cool parts in it, and the beginning provides the feeling of a comic book atmosphere which I enjoyed. But the movie has so much potential with a character like Jonah Hex and an actor like Josh Brolin. Megan Fox plays Lila, Hex's girlfriend, who is used for eye candy and mainly just shoots a gun in the movie. No acting is required. John Malkovich is too good to play such a mindless villain. He seems evil when we first meet him, but the character adds nothing. A backstory about him perhaps would have helped, but there are no details in the movie. We know Turnbull killed Hex's family because Hex killed his brother. That's about it. Burke should have been the main bad guy. He is way more creepy and unpredictable. Jonah Hex tries to be everything to everyone and ends up disappointing them all. I have gone a little easier on the movie because I have seen worse and my expectations were never that high to begin with. The real tragedy is how exciting and entertaining this movie could have been if it was handled with better care. But Brolin is still cool in my book. We do have Wall Street, money never sleeps to look forward to. Not all comic books have brightly colored spandex-clad heroes and superpowers. Some of them class themselves up as graphic novels and have more pulpy, adult-orientated stories, ripe for getting the big screen treatment. Several non-superhero-based graphic novels have made their way from the pages to the theaters in the last decade, including the underrated and highly recommended Jack the Ripper story. From Hell starring Johnny Depp, the monster Spartan hit 300, and the exceptional Oscar-nominated The Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks and Paul Newman. 2010 has already brought the above-average actioner The Losers, and the upcoming Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in August looks extremely promising, coming from the director of Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. Most films based on graphic novels bend seemingly ordinary plots into engaging, well-written stories with snappy dialogue and a fresh visual style and panache that comes from their source material. And then there's Jonah Hex. As my former teacher co-workers would say, shut the front door. Jonah Hex is as convoluted and as haphazardly made as the title character's face. Based on the DC Comics graphic novel, Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, is a former Confederate soldier who growls through his horrible facial scarring as a cynical and surly bounty hunter. His change from a noble soldier to flawed loner came from his former commanding officer, Quentin Turnbull, played by psycho-villain expert John Malkovich, naturally, murdering his wife and son in revenge for Jonah being responsible for Turnbull's son's death while fighting together in the war. Quentin has Jonah tied up, crucifixion style, to watch his family's murder and then brands his face and leaves him for dead. Days later, Jonah is found and brought back to health by local Native Americans and finds that, after being so close to death, he now has the ability to communicate with the dead by touch, done deliciously with special effects. Years pass to 1876 and Turnbull, aided by his demented Irish right-hand man Burke, Michael Fassbender from 300 and Inglorious Bastard, has now resurfaced as a national terrorist when he acquires the weapons and technology to destroy whole towns and cities. After Turnbull repeatedly evades capture, President Ulysses S. Grant, I guess they couldn't get Kevin Kline from the Bomb Wild Wild West to reprise the role, so they went with Aidan Quinn, preposterously turns to our wanted vigilante bounty hunter to help his soldiers led by Lt. Grass, an oddly placed Will Arnett, hunt him down before he attacks Washington during the country's centennial celebration. Throw in a useless Megan Fox for 21 minutes of eye candy screen time and you have the makings of a train wreck if you couldn't tell already. Josh Brolin looks the part and does his best to channel his inner Clint Eastwood shooting whiskey and bad guys and adding grizzled voice-over narration, but he is killing his stellar recent track record of Milk, for which he was Oscar nominated, and No Country for Old Men with Jonah Hex. The movie tries in its graphic novel fashion to offer over-the-top characters and action, but the pieces just don't fit together. Sure, a horse-mounted double Gatling gun looks damn cool, preposterous or not, but Dragon Ball Z-looking orbs acting as the ultimate cannonball are a little much to buy, even in a comic book movie. The movie gets its half-star beyond one for at least a few successful attempts at colorful comic action style. The movie is just 81 disorganized minutes long. Random scenes mix with random flashbacks and makes for the most poorly constructed movie I've seen in a long time. Either they had no idea what they filmed and how it was supposed to come together, or they took an R-rated final product and trimmed the hell out of it. Jonah Hex unsuccessfully tries to take a very dark and violent graphic novel and soften it enough for a wide PG-13 rating and audience. The subject material, action, and violence would be much better suited going all the way, unapologetically, like Watchmen did over a year ago. As Tom Green yelled to a snake in Road Trip, unleash the fury. As for the movie Jonah Hex, unleash the unrated DVD and take your horse to a different sunset. There's just something about westerns that screams out, mesh me with other genres. Perhaps it's because most traditional westerns are one-note bores that fail to gain any recognition, don't get your panties in a bunch, I said most, and the application of futuristic weaponry and demonic spirits seems like a surefire way to breathe in a sense of modernity in a withering genre. Well, writer John Albano and artist Tony DeZuniga were most likely going for such an effect with their graphic novel, Jonah Hex, which was published by DC Comics. Now, according to Wikipedia, the popular, though I've never heard of it previous to seeing the film adaptation, comic series chronicled the adventures of the brutish antihero, whose face is scarred extensively, as he battles the forces of evil which threaten to destroy the fabric of Western living. Some important plot points in the comic series included Jonah's battle with alcoholism, his mother's turn to prostitution, and a family which he began to raise. With a story like this, it would seem like Jonah Hex would turn out to be at least a competent popcorn flick, but what Jimmy Hayward delivers is a complete atrocity. His Jonah Hex, which stars the talented Josh Brolin in the lead and the equally if not more capable John Malkovich as the antagonist, features not only cringe-inducing performances from both of these greats, which are on the same level as the talentless Megan Fox's performance, but also horrid pacing, dialogue, and ineptly done action scenes that falter due to a PG-13 rating. The first thing that alerts the audience of a potential stinker is the cliched battle montage which opens up the film for us. Next we see Hex, who is played by Brolin, tied and forced to watch the massacre of his family because of his betrayal to a group of renegades led by a sadistic Quentin Turnbull, Malkovich. Seems, thanks to his morals, Hex refused to continue slaughtering countless women and children for Turnbull, and this about-face caused the death of Turnbull's only son and made him a wanted man. Hex is branded and left for dead, but he is nursed back to health and returns as a badass motherfucker who has the power to resurrect the dead for a short period of time. He arms himself with a duo of Gatling guns and rides off on horseback in order to become a bounty hunter. But news hits Hex that Turnbull has committed suicide, and thus he commits to a relatively peaceful life, apart from killing bad guys and getting shot at, that is. Somewhere amidst this, we are introduced to Lila, Megan Fox, a prostitute who is infatuated by Hex. This happens without warning and Lila is devoid of any character development. However, this is quite common in Jonah Hex. But the steampunk elements of the plot come into play when Hex finds out that Turnbull faked his death and is planning on using a device which has the potential of annihilating entire cities at once, using some sort of Dragon Ball contraption. The president hires Hex to foil this plan, gain revenge, and once again save the day. Hayward, who also directed Horton Hears a Who, was obviously not up to the task of making an enjoyable trip to the Weird West. Instead, his latest film, which begins to fester within minutes, just seems like a bunch of random clips put together around a paper-thin and predictable plot. None of the characters are interesting nor likable, and it's really a sign of a film's mediocrity if one tends to root for the villain instead of the protagonist. Seriously, seeing the city blow up would have been a little bit entertaining. Another of the film's faults is its amateurish script written by Mark Naveldine and Brian Taylor. It's chock full of unintentional laughs, and the jokes that are intended to make the audience laugh simply elicit groans, except one which involves a dog. To top it off, Brolin speaks in an almost untranslatable monotone accent which slowly got on my nerves. Lastly, the action scenes are a mess. For a movie like this, an R rating is a necessity. Most of the fighting is incredibly censored and there is none of the grit that Jonah Hex originally promised. But at least the pyrotechnics employed on the film were competent. The explosions look decent on screen, but this alone offers no redeeming value for the film. The entire production of Jonah Hex must have been in fact, hexed, because such failure can only be accomplished through sorcery. I like most of the movies I see, which is why I almost never rank anything below a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. Generally, I try to pick movies that are both culturally influential and well made. Unfortunately, Jonah Hex is an exception to this rule. You've probably never heard of this movie, a western with a touch of the supernatural. Apparently it was originally a graphic novel, which I can only hope is better than the awful film that bears its name. The eponymous hero, Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, is a horrifically scarred bounty hunter with a vendetta. The villainous Quentin Turnbull, a tragically underused John Malkovich, infuriated by Hex's betrayal of his Confederate division during the Civil War, has killed his family. Near death, Jonah is rescued by the Crow Indians and bestowed with some sort of supernatural power to briefly reanimate the dead. This all takes place within the first 5 minutes of the film. No further explanation whatsoever is given for Jonah's bizarre powers. A few years later, the presumed dead Turnbull reappears with a new scheme, constructing a massive weapon allegedly developed by Eli Whitney. Yes, the inventor of the cotton gin himself. I'm sure he's rolling over in his grave, no pun intended. The US government promptly shows up at Jonah's door, offering him a full pardon in return for his elimination of Turnbull. Predictably, Jonah sets off on a revenge odyssey that involves causing innumerable explosions and leaving a long trail of bodies behind him. But what action movie would be complete without a female lead? Enter Lila, played with all the emotion of a brick wall by Megan Fox, a hooker with a heart of gold who seems to be Jonah's longtime lover. I could spend hours enumerating the problems with this film, but I'll try to be fairly succinct. This movie is a purposeless train wreck, with a plot that feels like it was written by a fourth grader. The storyline is just as confusing as you might expect. Zero time is spent on character development or emotional depth. This movie concentrates exclusively on burning down buildings and gunning down legions of supporting characters. Oh, and did I mention the explosions? Trains, boats, cities, buildings, living people, dead people, and undead people all get the dynamite treatment. I stopped counting after the fourth building was destroyed within the first 20 minutes. There are also plenty of ridiculously over-the-top moments. I occasionally like stupid action junkie movies, but this was too much even for me. Not only does Jonah ride a horse fitted with saddle-mounted Gatling guns, he also proceeds to utilize repeating crossbow pistols that fire exploding arrows. I'm not making this up. Toon Bull's mystery weapon is ludicrously overpowered, utilizing technology that looks like it was cribbed from Star Wars. This movie is supposed to take place in the 1800s, after all. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. In a bizarre arena fight scene, a snake man with inhumanly large jaws and acidic spittle shows up for about 2 minutes with no explanation whatsoever. 20 minutes later, an apparently injured Jonah is taken in by Native Americans who perform some kind of bizarre ritual involving a live crow flying out from Jonah's throat. The final battle is an incoherent mishmash of violent hand-to-hand combat intercut with dream sequence images, accompanied by a pounding heavy metal score. The movie is a constant stream of what just happened, sequences that defy all logic. The acting is on par with the rest of the film, which is to say, pretty bad. Jonah Hex displays no personality whatsoever, instead relying on a series of tired revenge film quips that add nothing to the movie. Quentin Turnbull, his arch-nemesis, is vaguely unthreatening. For most of the movie, he seems grumpy rather than murderous. And plenty has already been said about Megan Fox's acting, so I'll refrain from going into further detail. And that brings up another, graver problem with Jonah Hex, the total and perverse objectification of the character Lila. It's one thing to have a strong female lead, it's quite another to introduce a character whose sole purpose is to sexualize the tone of the movie. From the beginning of the film until its conclusion, Lila's wardrobe is limited to a very low-cut corset and stockings that leave most of her leg exposed. No time is ever spent investing in her character or exploring her intrinsic worth as a human being. She's just there to show a lot of skin and titillate the young male demographic that this film targets. But perhaps most disturbingly of all is the way that the film appears to take twisted pleasure in throwing her into violent situations. Lila is repeatedly slapped, leered at, beaten, and attacked with knives. And this isn't some form of social commentary about the abuse of women, it's seemingly included to appeal to the worst elements of the audience. This sexualization of the violence in Jonah Hex is highly inappropriate and fundamentally demeaning to women. Worldview elements are murky at best. Native American mysticism is liberally sprinkled throughout the film, and the dead souls Jonah contacts are apparently suffering in hell. There isn't a single ray of spiritual hope anywhere in the movie, which is a real tragedy. A film like this has the potential to explore significant issues, but Jonah Hex prefers to rely on a mashup of pop spirituality and occultism. We've had a fair few comic book adaptations in recent years, but as with any transference of medium they can vary wildly in quality, from the stellar, Christopher Nolan's Batman films, and the artistically faithful, Sin City, to the downright indefensible, Constantine. So along comes Jonah Hex, another adaptation from the DC stable of lucrative franchises. Less well known than the spandex-clad heroes of more colorful graphic novels, Hex airs very much on the darker side of the comics spectrum. That however has not always stopped those adapting the source material from giving their titular characters a fresher, more mainstream appeal, as was the case with Ghost Rider and Constantine. Figures that should, by rights, be enigmatic antiheroes somehow go through the Hollywood wash and are rinsed of all their complexity, neuroses, and malevolence, re-emerging on the other side as merely troubled good guys. Well, we can firmly put Hex into this category, but for once this is not entirely against the original material's tone. Originally planned as a 1-hour television feature, producer Akiva Goldsman remained involved through its limbo stage and came out the other side with new co-producers attached, a genuine leading man in the shape of Josh Brolin and a fresh script from Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor, the duo responsible for co-writing and co-directing Crank, 2006, and Gamer, 2009. The character first appeared in the second volume of the American Western comic series All-Star Western back in 1972. Such was the success of the character that he continued to appear until he was deemed big enough to warrant his own series of comics, entitled unsurprisingly Jonah Hex, which went on to run for a not too shabby 92 issues. Since then the character has gone back and forth, appearing in a new title Hex where he was shifted to a more post-apocalyptic 21st century setting, as well as more recent offerings, most notably the excellent 2005 series by Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti. A few things have changed along the way, but the essence of the character remains the same. He is a disfigured bounty hunter traveling the West, killing all those who cross him but adhering to his own moral code of not harming the innocent. As a mainstream film, this last part of his code doesn't leave much wiggle room for a true anti-hero, but I suppose that was always to be expected. The key is how ruthless they have been willing to portray him and whether they are leaning more towards the visceral violence of more modern takes on the character. With Hex being a traditional hero/anti-hero character and being rooted firmly in reality, he lacks not only the flashier superhero powers but also their decidedly flamboyant arch-enemies. The one notable figure from the comics that enters the fray here is that of General Quinton Turnbull, played by John Malkovich. The story is set up in an alarmingly hasty manner, cobbled together with all the grace of a previously on, pre-opening credits sequence of the average TV cop series. The condensed version tells us that Hex was a soldier for the South during the American Civil War who, for some reason that isn't explained here, though it is fleshed out in the comics, suddenly disavows himself of his Confederate ways, and due to this his men are captured, his best friend lies dead by his hands, and he himself is branded a traitor. It would have been nice for first-time director Jimmy Hayward to give us something tangible to hang onto at this point, but he eschews such simplicity as explaining the key plot points in favor of slow-motion shots of horses galloping through the dusty plains and an overly manful voiceover with such gems as "folks can believe what they like, but eventually a man's gotta decide if he's gonna do what's right, that choice cost me more than I bargained for." This was never likely to be a work of great subtlety, but it becomes clear immensely quickly that stylization is the order of the day here, as comic book imagery takes over from the live action to tell the backstory of the main character. In short, General Turnbull didn't take kindly to what he sees as Hex's betrayal of his Confederate troops that led to Hex killing his best friend, who also happened to be the general's son Jeb, so decides to teach him a lesson, and a particularly grisly one at that. Turnbull has him tied to a cross whilst his son and wife are left to perish as they are burned down with their house. The coup de grace is Turnbull's insistence upon leaving Hex alive, but branding him across his cheek with a QT mark in order that he lives in constant anguish, knowing what it signifies every time he has to look at it. So with a brutal opening, fans will likely be hoping that there is a suitably dark atmosphere around the rest of the film. No sooner is the scene established than we are whisked away to be shown what a mean customer Hex has become, as he drags the bodies of 3 men behind his horse into a flea-bitten backwater to collect his bounty. Once the pleasantries of the talking are out of the way, the bullets fly and all that is left is Hex and some more corpses to bury, one of which is a sheriff. This helps establish him as a man capable of anything, undaunted by title or mantle but merely focused on cutting down those who cross him and sticking to his code. This brief but bombastic altercation also helps put the film firmly into an otherworldly, decidedly steampunk, realm that becomes strangely reminiscent of Wild Wild West. He uses not 6 shooters to cut down his enemies but 2 horse-mounted Gatling guns that were somehow erstwhile concealed. Realism may be out the window, but that has never stopped a decent Western before. The true weirdness though is not yet revealed, for after Hex's terrible injuries he was at death's door, whereupon he was rescued by a tribe of Crow Native Americans. Due to his wounds he was too far gone, and although he now walks amongst the living he has seen enough of the other side to now be able to communicate with the dead. A neat twist that should give the film a supernatural flavor, but unfortunately it is used in the most basic manner possible. With Hex roaming the West now a wanted man for his slaying of a lawman, his lust for vengeance has been denied him as we learn Turnbull died in a hotel fire some years before, or did he? Short answer, no he didn't, and if you think I'm blunt in saying so, believe me the film takes as little care in pointing viewers in that direction. The renegade general has taken the forming of the United States badly and has spent his time busily attacking civilian targets, earning him the nickname El Terrorista. Don't worry though, if you were thinking this meant things would turn into another thinly veiled diatribe about modern-day terrorism, think again, or perhaps don't bother thinking about it at all, as the script writers clearly haven't. Malkovich does his best as a despotic madman hell-bent on destroying the peace of a country he has come to despise via a superweapon which he is in the process of assembling, but it is a role he could have performed in his sleep. Brolin is admirable in his fight against the B-movie status of proceedings, being vaguely reminiscent of Bruce Campbell at times in his ability to be at once in on the joke and outside it. Perhaps it should be applauded that one of the most photogenic actors around should want to take a part where he is shown to be disfigured. The makeup lacks the punch of some more grisly artistic versions of the character's visage as seen in the comics, as there is no way they could make an entire cheek disappear. Told via flashback he cut away the brand left by Turnbull with a heated axe, and sadly the one enlarged eyeball isn't even attempted. The line of melted flesh that runs down the side of his mouth leads to an almost Brando-esque parody of mumbling at times and never gives the desired shock value of the original material, though is a sound effort at uglifying Brolin and staying true to the material. Michael Fassbender, Hunger, is arguably the most eye-catching figure, playing a cheerful tattooed killer in Turnbull's gang. He seems to make his role larger than it actually is with his bonhomie approach to dispatching the innocent with a smile. Megan Fox appears in a pretty throwaway role as a sassy hooker and ally of Hex, being neither blessed with a decent story of her own nor given anything genuinely interesting to do. This is formulaic to the nth degree, and unfortunately even the action sequences, which by rights should have saved such pulp fare as this, are let down by a distinct lack of imagination. When about to shoot your arch-enemy halfway through the film, say something, and give him half a second to escape or for someone to sneak up on you. Put in a female character that gets taken hostage. When locked up, don't fall back on clever twists, just have a character suddenly inform you of their extraordinary lock-picking skills. When a villain has the upper hand, don't show them unemotionally dispatching the hero, make them toy with him in order to give him half a dozen chances to escape or get the upper hand. The final get out of jail card is when Hex is seemingly mortally wounded. He is once again brought back to life by crows through a process of general chanting, a few herbs put on wounds and bizarrely vomiting up a crow. Even the fact of Hex fighting for the South is explained in a painfully obvious he's not racist though side conversation. At no point does the script or Hayward's direction take a stand against the obvious route or an inventive turn. There are a few decent explosions and the aforementioned horse-mounted gun scene is fairly ripping fun, but other than that this is derivative and uninspiring. What should have been a darkly iconic comic book adaptation has been made into a poorly scripted and pedestrian mainstream movie that shows the kind of lack of craft and that'll-do approach that comics aficionados are likely all too familiar with. It may not be as unfaithful to the source material as such adaptations as Constantine, but there is little more credit one can throw its way. This is the latest DC Comics movie adaptation about an anti-hero named Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, who lost everything in the Civil War. After being betrayed by Hex, the dastardly Quentin Turnbull takes revenge and kills Hex's family, then brands his face with a horrible scar. Inches from death, Hex makes it back from the other side with the supernatural ability to bring the dead back to life and speak with them momentarily. When Turnbull shows up again to take down the US government, Hex gets his chance at revenge. As short as the film is, there's a lot of repetition here. Hex's origin is described, then reshot later in the film. There's an inordinate amount of flashbacks to earlier scenes from the film, and the story kinda loses its way about halfway through. But just when I thought it had completely fallen apart, Hex blew something up, and I was suddenly interested again. I can't tell you what this movie was meant to be. There are glimpses of character and story arcs that are rushed through in this film, and the only reason we know there should be something more there is that recognizable actors can be found in the roles. Blink, and you might miss Wes Bentley, Michael Shannon, or Tom Wopat. I still have no idea what they were doing in this movie, but they showed up somewhere on a call sheet. Much of the creative editing of the film revolves around Megan Fox, who is determined to deliver a final death knell to her career. Sure, she's attractive to a degree, but her face has had more work done on it than a beat-up hot rod at a chop shop. Her corset gives her a freakishly thin waist, and she's glistening with sweat through the whole film. And not sweaty in a she's so hot sort of way, but rather in a wow, hookers really didn't bathe much back then way. I could spend the entire review bitching about Fox, her terrible acting and her embarrassing attempt at an accent that makes John Malkovich's accent sound proper. But she's really not in the film that much. It's as if the producers realized what a liability she was and cut her from most scenes, then digitally smoothed out her famous blemishes in others. Even with the short 80-minute running time, Fox is barely in the film. That's all I have to say about that. But don't get me wrong. There were still some fun things in this movie. Josh Brolin leads that list. He's not given much to work with, but the guy comes across well as the grizzly scarred action hero of the Old West. Sure, he chews through the scenery with his heavily made-up face, but it's a hoot if you don't take things too seriously. There's also some great action sequences. We're not talking the A-team level of production, but for the guy looking for lots of shit getting blown up, you can do worse. Think of Jonah Hex as an Old West version of The Losers. Not much there in terms of story, but plenty of bullets and fireballs. Like I said, it's not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the kind of film I'd pay matinee prices for and enjoy on a Saturday afternoon, probably alone in the theater. Jonah Hex is not a handsome man. With scars covering his body, a grimace in his jaw, and the strong hint of weathering in his face, the man is anything but ravishing. The same can be said for the film. Jonah Hex was not enticing or refined. The film lacked the arc of a plot, the grace of similar comic adaptations, and the allure of coherency. Despite all of these flaws, much like Jonah Hex himself, I still found an attraction. Josh Brolin is a rough and tough Western renegade, Jonah Hex, who, after losing his family, ventures off as a bounty hunter. Megan Fox is a smoking hot, gun-wielding prostitute looking to make Jonah Hex her man. John Malkovich resurrects his evil mastermind performance from Con Air as Quentin Turnbull, the man responsible for the death of Hex's family and, soon, the destruction of the United States. How, do you ask, could this film fail? Regardless of such a stacked deck, it does indeed fail. The film lacks an arc. Instead of a beginning, a middle, and an end, the viewer gets strung along on Hex's mishmash journey, flat and horizontally. Previous films have pulled off the lack of an arc, but still found ways to build the suspense leading up to fights and climaxes. Jonah Hex does not. The fights with prominent characters, like Michael Fassbender and John Malkovich, are thrown at you without warning, and not in a good way. The main characters are completely expendable, Will Arnett and Wes Bentley for example. Without anticipation, Jonah Hex just happens, with the viewer experiencing no emotion or investment. Jonah Hex is the DC Comics version of Marvel's Ghost Rider. However, Ghost Rider was salvageable. Nicolas Cage, Eva Mendes, Donald Logue, and Wes Bentley work well enough together that the film is worthwhile. Jonah Hex scatters its characters across the game board and expects all the elements to still fall together in an interesting pattern. This was not the result. Apparently, according to the lore of Jonah Hex, starting fires and causing explosions was what the Wild West was made of. I cannot recall a town that was left standing, besides the capital, by the end of the film. The film did, however, bring to my attention, A. how flammable buildings supposedly are, and B. how buildings can explode when doused in a fire. The graphics of the film left much to be desired. The cannonball graphics were laughable and the golden orbs were extremely out of place. The makers of the film would have aided themselves by viewing Wild Wild West with Will Smith and Kevin Kline before making Jonah Hex. The idea of steampunk, fictional works set in an era or world where steam power is still widely used but with prominent elements of either science fiction or fantasy Wikipedia, was masterfully crafted in the production of that film. Jonah Hex tries to accommodate the idea of steampunk, but lets its anachronistic tendencies fall to the wayside. The death-harboring ship cannon is obviously out of place in the original Western world, yet no attention is brought to its disconnection. Jonah Hex relies completely on its graphic novel origins. The creators somehow believe that by adapting the film from comics, there is no need to follow normal movie-making conventions. Jonah Hex gets thrown into the annals of better films like Sherlock Holmes, Ghost Rider, and Wild Wild West. Though the cast is not at their best, they are ultimately what wins me over the most about the film. Left wanting more Megan Fox and John Malkovich as these characters mean the creators at least did something right. As long as you do not anticipate an award-winning film, Jonah Hex is still enjoyable and satisfies the warmongering, arsonist/pyromaniac in all of us. Leaving the theater, I felt as though I did not enjoy the film as much as I did, but looking back and awarding it 3 stars, it left at least some impression with me. First off, let me start by saying that while I honestly enjoyed Jonah Hex, the film itself is a mess. I went in thinking that at best I was going to see a good bad movie because the previews led me to believe there was no way this would be a truly good film. Boy, was I right. While the film is enlivened by a terrific score and features several fine performances, this is clearly a picture with a troubled history. Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor wrote the film and were set to direct, but creative differences led to their departure from the project, and Jimmy Hayward wound up in the director's seat. All I can say is that whatever happened during the making of this picture, there was clearly a lot of confusion, and the film plays like something hastily assembled. Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, is a Civil War soldier who turns his back on the war only to have his sadistic commander murder his family right before his eyes and scar him for life with a brand. The character survives, removing the brand with a hatchet and making the scar on his face infinitely worse. This scar represents one of the film's biggest problems, as I don't know how many audiences will enjoy looking at the title character for the film's scant 81-minute running time. Additionally, the scar is very over the top and doesn't look incredibly realistic. Most problematic is the strand of flesh that stretches from the character's upper lip to his bottom lip. It looks about as ridiculous as it sounds, and initially it is very hard for us to see the character as anything but a farce because of the makeup. I will give credit here to Josh Brolin, who is absolutely terrific in a part he invests such sincerity in that at times he is almost able to make us forget about the garish design of the character. His brooding presence was probably the film's strongest asset. First off, let me start by saying that while I honestly enjoyed Jonah Hex, the film itself is a mess. I went in thinking that at best I was going to see a good bad movie because the previews led me to believe there was no way this would be a truly good film. Boy, was I right. While the film is enlivened by a terrific score and features several fine performances, this is clearly a picture with a troubled history. Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor wrote the film and were set to direct, but creative differences led to their departure from the project, and Jimmy Hayward wound up in the director's seat. All I can say is that whatever happened during the making of this picture, there was clearly a lot of confusion, and the film plays like something hastily assembled. Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, is a Civil War soldier who turns his back on the war only to have his sadistic commander murder his family right before his eyes and scar him for life with a brand. The character survives, removing the brand with a hatchet and making the scar on his face infinitely worse. This scar represents one of the film's biggest problems, as I don't know how many audiences will enjoy looking at the title character for the film's scant 81-minute running time. Additionally, the scar is very over the top and doesn't look incredibly realistic. Most problematic is the strand of flesh that stretches from the character's upper lip to his bottom lip. It looks about as ridiculous as it sounds, and initially it is very hard for us to see the character as anything but a farce because of the makeup. I will give credit here to Josh Brolin, who is absolutely terrific in a part he invests such sincerity in that at times he is almost able to make us forget about the garish design of the character. His brooding presence was probably the film's strongest asset. Hex wants revenge against the man who killed his family and marred his face, John Malkovich as Quentin Turnbull. Malkovich has never been more absurd, but he embodies his character with such malevolence and fury that he stands as a worthy antagonist. Malkovich's ferocity almost makes up for the fact that his character's quest to destroy America in its youth seems utterly meaningless, and only a speech delivered near the end led me to believe that this former Confederate soldier was actually retaliating because his side lost the war, though it would be hard to paint his motivations or efforts as anything but ludicrous. Michael Fassbender serves up another memorable turn as Burke, Turnbull's right-hand man, a demented Irishman with extensive tattoos and a delicious mean streak. Fassbender, Stelios in 300, Lieutenant Archie Hecox in Inglourious Bastard, is quickly becoming a force to be reckoned with, and his upcoming Centurion looks positively massive. Here he adds a lot of excitement to a jumbled picture, and he was one of the best things about Jonah Hex. Megan Fox plays Lila, a feisty whore who has her heart set on Jonah Hex and her finger on the trigger. Fox has taken a lot of flack for her ability, or lack thereof, but no one has ever accused her of being hard on the eyes. She looks incredible here, and her skimpy costumes leave little to the imagination. In addition, I had no issues with her performance. She doesn't necessarily set the screen on fire, but she was very believable in her part, and lovingly attending to Jonah Hex requires some acting chops. She also handled herself well in the action scenes. All in all, Fox was a capable female lead for this type of picture. Several other recognizable performers lend their efforts, including Will Arnett, Michael Shannon, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and Wes Bentley, and all of the performances ring true. Only Malkovich and Fassbender go gleefully over the top here. So, Hex is a bounty hunter hoping to avenge his family's death, and when the president, a somber Aidan Quinn, far too somber for this type of movie, in fact, asks him to stop Turnbull, he's happy to set his sights on the man who scarred him for life. That leads to a lot of shooting, a lot of occult imagery, and several decent action scenes that keep the film moving. Unfortunately, one can only imagine that there must have been a whole lot of film left on the cutting room floor. That's because this picture clearly doesn't fit together, and a great Mastodon score and a number of sound performances can't make up for the fact that entire sequences of this picture are so sloppy that it is frequently hard to fathom exactly what's happening or why. There are definitely some impressive scenes in the mix, and I wound up liking Brolin's demented Hex, a cold-blooded killer who can speak to the dead and survive almost anything, but many of the transitions are poorly executed and so much of the plot is muddled or inadequately defined that there is entirely too much confusion along the way. If you're looking for a good film with a gripping plot executed to perfection, I strongly advise you to steer clear of this one. However, if you like the occasional bad movie and you're prepared to laugh, cheer, and scratch your head in equal measures, this one's for you. In all honesty, I had a good time with Jonah Hex, but having said that, I have a hard time recommending it to anyone else. Magic balls are the linchpin of Jonah Hex's finale. Specifically, big black explosive balls which are detonated by small orange glowy balls. Where did these balls come from? How do they interact with each other? And from what are they constructed? Feel free to make up your own explanations since none are proffered by Jimmy Hayward's film. Maybe they're demonic vessels containing the angry souls of fallen soldiers. Or they're containers filled with that most destructively rancid of liquids, Sunny D. Regardless of the surrounding story's supernatural elements, this ball-on-ball WMD, laughably referred to as simply the super weapon, is an inexplicable mystery that makes no sense from any vantage point, especially given that it exists in 1876, and can only be utilized via a gargantuan ship-mounted 6-shooter cannon that facial hairy Confederate terrorist Quentin Turnbull, John Malkovich, seems to have constructed in approximately 2 days' time. And from plans originally drawn up by Eli Whitney. I am not making this up. Jonah Hex, however, definitely appears to be making itself up as it goes along. Screenwriters Neveldine and Taylor long since disowned their script, and the finished product certainly suggests a tale horribly warped by rewrites and a lack of firm direction. So many ideas, conflicts, and subplots are hastily smushed together that, were it not for the narration of bounty hunter Hex, Josh Brolin, or the familiar-faced supporting players, Will Arnett, Wes Bentley, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Lance Reddick, a blink and you'll miss him Michael Shannon, whose roles have been cut to ribbons in the editing room, there'd be no making heads or tails of this adaptation of the DC Comics series. Which isn't to suggest that what did make it on screen is the least bit lucid, though the basic plot, scored, thuddingly, by Mastodon, does clearly revolve around Hex's quest for revenge against Turnbull, who years earlier as payback for Hex killing his son, which was done in order to prevent the Civil War destruction of a hospital made Hex watch his wife and son burn, and then left him with a nasty mark of Cain on his right cheek. A subsequent flashback implies that after his face was mutilated, Hex further burned it with an axe blade to remove Turnbull's cattle brand insignia, but it's hard to tell, since Hayward's 82-minute film speeds through every scene with a squirmy restlessness that suggests it badly needs to pee. Thanks to his near-death experience at the hands of Turnbull, Hex can converse with the dead, and despite his being a former Confederate, we're informed that he wasn't a secessionist or a supporter of slavery. Whew. Commendable politics notwithstanding, though, Hex still comes off like a third-rate man with no name in bad 50s horror movie makeup. Looking uncomfortable in cheek and mouth prosthetics that minimize his expressiveness, Brolin is reduced to lame one-liners and riding on horseback in stilted slow mo, along the way having to listen to blather about a host of undeveloped cliched themes, the frontier's transition into industrialized modernity, the similarity between his and Turnbull's murderous methods, while engaging in PG-13 violence that's amazingly free of actual blood, culminating with a man being killed by rotator blades. Without, as a follow-up image makes plain, suffering any visible injury. Even with its fleet runtime, Hayward's paranormal western drags for stretches, including every Hex hallucination about a big red clay clearing where he does imaginary battle with Turnbull. And also, during every moment that Megan Fox, as the feisty whore with a soft spot for Hex, struts around in a lungs-crushing corset or appears in close-up, her face digitally airbrushed to resemble a newly buffed Corvette hood. Unintentional comedy inevitably arises, as when Hex saved from gunshot wounds by faceless Native Americans exhales ghost crows, and then spits out a real live one, before sitting bolt upright and screaming Turnbull. Throughout, Jonah Hex is a narrative mess, too busy combining Old West tropes with sci-fi contraptions, in a manner reminiscent of Wild Wild West, as well as racing between nonsensically matched present-past incidents and spastic fights, to bother with genuine characterizations. Thus, the proceedings fall back on defining heroes and villains through weird facial blemishes, not just burn victim Hex but also impish neck-tattooed Irish killer Burke, a giddy, game Michael Fassbender, and Turnbull, whose bushy mustache and mutton chops seem to change appearance ever so slightly from one shot to the next. Their disfigured faces fit for a disfigured film. After a few minutes, I was already prepared to quit watching Jonah Hex. At this point, bounty hunter Jonah Hex, Josh Brolin, had already been scarred for life, been in an action scene in which he used Gatling guns mounted on his horse to kill a bunch of people who wanted him dead. And then he went to a bar, shot a man who looked at him funny, and then met up with someone who I can only assume is his girlfriend, and is played by Megan Fox. All of this happened, and I was already tired. If only I knew what was coming. The plot ends up having Hex recruited by the American government. The man who scarred Hex, a man who he had believed to be dead, is apparently very much alive. He's prepping a super weapon that is supposed to be able to destroy almost anything that it is pointed at. The government decides that Hex is the only man who can stop this from happening, and gets the chance to enact revenge on the man who left him scarred for life. The main gimmick in Jonah Hex is Hex's ability to communicate with the deceased. Apparently almost dying gives you this ability. Nobody else can see this happening though, so it's entirely possible that when Hex claims that he wasn't all brought back, that he's talking about his mental state, and that he is actually hallucinating when talking to the dead. Either way, he does this enough times to make it noteworthy, and these interrogations are interesting enough. There are two good things about Jonah Hex. It's a very short film, which means that if you choose to watch it, you don't have to waste that much of your time. The other good thing is Josh Brolin, who almost makes you forget the terrible parts of the film. He loses himself in his character, even though he plays a generic macho, hell-bent on revenge, archetypical character. The other characters are even better definitions of the word stock. Fox's character is the standard hooker with a good heart, the villains are wisecracking lunatics, and that's about all the people in the film. Nobody except for Hex gets a backstory or explanation, and we are expected to just accept that the relationships are already established. I didn't care, so that was not hard to accept. While Brolin is entertaining enough as an actor, nobody else in the film was any good. There's a game you can play while watching the film, try and figure out who has the worst phony accent. My pick goes to Megan Fox, who gives a slightly better shot at being a real actor here than she did in Transformers, makes it painfully obvious that she is out of her element when on screen with Brolin, something that happens about as often as the script would allow, likely just to give the audience some form of eye candy. Not even the action scenes are that entertaining. The early ones are the best, and the film continues losing steam as it progresses. Brolin on a horse with mounted Gatling guns is an interesting idea, and it's kind of fun to watch. But that lasts for a few seconds, and then it is over. Hex is a good shot, to be sure, but that also makes the action scenes less interesting. We're already fairly certain who's going to win, even when Hex gets shot multiple times in the chest. Among the things not explained is some of the technology available to Mr. Hex. Those Gatling guns certainly wouldn't have been invented in a society where the telegraph is still widely used. But nobody is shocked to see them, apart from the fact that those he aims them at are certain they will die. Bystanders don't question them. And then there is this big weapon that has been in construction for years. How has nobody done anything about it up until now? We don't get to find out. Something I liked about the film, its length, may end up being one of its biggest problems as well. There is no time for anything to be explained, no time for character development, no time for proper pacing, and no time for an actual story to be told. The plot is too basic to matter, and ends up with Brolin just going from place to place, interrogating dead bodies, before ending up in Washington, turning the film from a western into a large-scale shootout on a boat. Jonah Hex is a film that needed something better than a strong lead actor. Josh Brolin gives it his all, but the rest of the film doesn't live up to his screen presence. Not that he's playing a unique character, as he's all archetypes, but at least he commanded my attention. Everything else falls flat. The best thing about it is that it only takes about 75 minutes to finish, meaning you won't waste much time if you decide to watch it. Thank goodness for that, because any longer and you might find yourself wishing to be able to be interrogated by Hex himself. This film, directed by Jimmy Hayward, screenplay by Neveldine and Taylor, story by William Farmer, based on characters appearing in, produced by Akiva Goldsman, starring Josh Brolin, cinematography Mitchell Amundsen, edited by Fernando Villena, music by Marco Beltrami, production companies Legendary Pictures, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures, release date June 18, 2010, running time 81 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $47 million, box office $11 million. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing movie stories. Thank you for watching.